Good morning. If you didn't know yet, I just started a YouTube channel. So the first video, which was the introduction to Job, has been posted. And I was trying to get a link, then realized a link is meaningless on a PowerPoint that you can't do anything with. I haven't got a QR code or anything. I'm not technological in that regard, but I did manage to get the first video up this morning. So as YouTube clears the videos, because they have to check for copyright issues, they'll be posted. My goal is to get them up 2 per week so that eventually, if you missed a message, you can go back and watch it on YouTube, and you can share the link with people, and it doesn't have to be from Dropbox. And so there it is. My YouTube channel is Bernard Saint 21, and the only videos I posted so far are the Job video. I think one's up this morning, and if everything clears, the next one will be up Wednesday. So we are wrapping up science and truth in the book of Job. And I wanted to end this series of messages by walking us back through each of the topics and reminding us that God cares about us so much. When we look at the details he's woven into the fabric of our reality, and we look at the way he puts truth about the world around us into the narrative of Scripture, I want you to know that all truth comes from God, and everything God says in the Bible is true. So we can trust what he says because we've examined the science in the book of Job. Now, we started off with astronomy back in November, believe it or not. We talked about the constellations. Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season, or can you guide the Great Bear with its cubs? And we looked at relative motion in constellations. We looked how far these stars are away from us. And these are things Job could not comprehend. I mean, honestly, we can know that the stars are several million light years away, but we don't comprehend that. And when we look into the sky, we see constellations sometimes where there aren't constellations. Those aren't clusters of stars except to our perception. But from God's point of view, he knows where all the stars are located. He named the stars. Job couldn't have known any of this, but God knew it and revealed questions to Job, which when we looked into it as scientists, astronomers throughout history, we've discovered that the questions he posed were not random questions, but those questions revealed truths about our sky. He stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. When in the book of Job, we see descriptions of earth, modern science looks at verses like this one and says that, yeah, that's true, but because it was written so long ago, it must have meant something else. And I'm here to refute that. God knew where he put earth. He didn't lose earth. He didn't put earth on top of turtles or elephants or Atlas or anything else. He didn't need that. He put earth on nothing. He suspended it over empty space. We know that this is God showing that he knows what we do not. And then we covered earth sciences. We looked at the science of the earth, and we looked at rotation. We looked at erosion. We looked at the mountain roots, underground treasures, the weight of the air, and what is under the crust. What are the foundations of the earth? Job 38, 4-7 says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurement? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" This is God reminding Job and historians, geologists, skeptics, and believers alike that in the beginning, man was not present, but God was. For this idea of rotation, God knew how to get the earth balanced in its cold and heat cycles in the daily and yearly sense. Job didn't need to know how that worked, But God set that in motion during creation. He didn't consult with man before doing so. We have a reliable narrator who was present for the creation of the world. And he's reminding Job that as wise as Job may have been, as much as he might have known, he did not know how the earth was created. Only God knew. And even though skeptics will say the bases were sunk, cornerstone, all this foundation, skeptics will point to a picture of a building and say, this is the old world view of the earth where it was built on something, because everything has to be built on something. And God's question is not telling him that this is built on something that we don't understand. He was asking Job, do you know how it was built? Do you know what's at the bottom? What's underneath the crust? Mankind has really good guesses. But honestly, what's at the Earth's core? We don't know for sure. We've got really good guesses. But no one's been there. No one's seen it. We get seismic activity, and through wave technology, radio, earthquake, even sonar, we can take really good guesses at what's below our surface. But we've never been there. We've never seen it. And God says, I saw it. I know what's there. We talked about erosion. As a mountain falls and crumbles away and a rock is moved from its place, as water wears away stones and as torrents wash away the soil of the earth, so you destroy the hope of man. This is Job describing the events. This is not God describing it. And until Mount St. Helens, science hadn't really observed this on a man's lifespan scale. And we know Job had a longer lifespan than any of us. He lived 140 years after all the trauma was past. And post-flood events, as we've studied, could have created an awful lot of turmoil on the surface of the earth. There are many aftershock events. There's evidence to show that ice melts may have caused things like the rapid formation of the Grand Canyon. And Job may have seen similar events in his country. We talked a little bit about the Black Sea flood. We talked a little bit about the possibility of the interconnected lake from Galilee to the Dead Sea that may have disappeared during Job's life. He saw great changes happen. He saw the erosion happen on a rapid scale. And while skeptics say that there's no way one man could observe erosion on that scale, it says it in God's word. There's no reason why we shouldn't believe it. In this session of geoscience, we covered a lot of topics that shows that God knows all the layers of the earth. He's in control of even the unseen parts of our planet, and he described them really well to Job's level of understanding. Then we talked about oceanography. Who shut in the doors when it burst? Who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far you shall come, and no further, and here your proud waves be stayed. The book of Job contains passages with many themes related to oceanography. God put boundaries for the seas. He questioned whether Job had traveled to the springs of the sea or walked in the deepest parts. He described the ocean's depths with terms like springs, channels, and recesses. We could view these as poetic and theological reflection on God's power to control the oceans, but scientific discoveries have confirmed the sea has features like this: deep sea hydrothermal vents, deep channels. 5 years ago, less than 5% of the ocean was mapped to a high resolution. Today, nearly 20% has been mapped. That's an incredible leap, but it still leaves 80% awaiting detailed mapping. We don't know what the whole ocean floor looks like in great detail. But God knows everything in every corner of the ocean. When he posed these questions to Job, God highlighted the vast difference between his perspective and that of humanity. He used the power and mystery of the ocean to show his sovereign authority. I didn't tap that one. Oh, my Y slid. Sorry about that. Then we talked about zoology. In Job 39, there are a lot of questions about animals. In fact, 38 and 39 have 10 animals listed. And God asks questions of each animal: the lion, the raven, the mountain goat and deer, the wild donkey, the wild ox, or as we discovered, the unicorn, the ostrich, the warhorse, the hawk, the eagle. And he said, "Is this by your understanding, Job? Do you create this?" When we looked at the animal kingdom, this question of Job about the source code for animal instincts reminds us that with every wild animal, there's wisdom that was given to them by God, not by man, that guides animals in their lives. But in our lives, we're not pre-programmed for everything. We do not live by mere instinct, but by rational choice, which was given to us by God. Each of these animals presented do well in the niche they were designed to fill, but mankind can adapt to various roles, and each of us can train to do better in any field we're called to. Animals are great specialists. I don't know how spiders know the geometry of the web before they start, but they can create patterns over and over again. They don't go to math school, they just do it. We as humans can draw spider webs. It takes practice, it takes skill to make it look real, to match up with what nature does. God gave us that ability to learn, to grow, to be different. God's speeches depict a created order that is radically non-anthropocentric, that is not centered on human beings. They invite Job to a place of humility. He is just one among many creatures. But they also invite Job to wonder at the beauty of creation, as God describes with pride the places and creatures he made. Job is only a passenger on this tour of the cosmos. So while he's not the center of the world, he does have a place in it, invited to delight in the world as God does. That's from Luther Seminary's Enter the Bible blog. God was not dismissing Job as he's talking about all these animals. He's inviting Job to be in wonder and in awe of the creation, to say, look at all these things. Did you do that? Do you know how it works? I do. You can trust me with your life. Then we looked at cryptozoology, and this was a study of unknown creatures. And we looked at the unicorn, behemoth, and leviathan, and we discovered these creatures have very concrete descriptions. We don't know for certain what each species was, but we trust that God's descriptions to Job are of creatures he was familiar with, especially when you consider that he comes off of this list of 10 creatures that we are familiar with today and just follows through with the behemoth, leviathan, and the unicorn. God made incredible creatures that we do know about. We looked at the duck-billed platypus as an example of a cryptid that for many years was considered a fraud. It was a scam. And honestly, every time I learn a new feature of the duck-billed platypus, I'm like, has it always been that way? Or is God just adding new features along the way? It's incredible. No one would ever come up with that. And so we look at the duck-billed platypus and we look at Leviathan and go, which one's really more unbelievable? Honestly, I go with the duck-billed platypus. I could believe that a giant lizard swims in the water and breathes fire faster than I could believe that a mammal lays eggs, has poison, uses electricity, and is glow in the dark. Like, those are not things I would put together as an animal. So we look at these cryptids, the unknown creatures, and go, These are only unknown to modern science. They are only unknown to us. But they were known to Job. They were known to God. If God can describe these creatures with such detail, imagine the detail he knows about you. He crafted each one of us to be something special, to be someone specific, to do something to his glory. We then looked at climatology, the study of the weather. We looked at different cloud types and rain types, thunder and lightning, snow, hail, ice, hail, and frost, and storms. The clouds are used largely in a metaphoric way, but there are specific types of clouds that were described. They indicate the distance between God and mankind, the barriers between us. But when we read it carefully, we notice that this barrier and distance is only from our point of view. It's not God's point of view. We don't know how to balance water on the air. We can steam stuff up, but we don't know how to create a cloud that sits on top. We've got fog machines. We know how to do that. We can make things humid. We can send humidity into the air, but we cannot make a cloud just bloop, sit so nicely. This morning we got great examples of the clouds outside. We don't know accurately which direction the clouds are going to go. We've got a weather prediction for tomorrow of a lot of rain. And over the course of the winter, we've had lots of predictions of rain that have not come to pass because God has split the clouds and they go this way and that way. And our best weather guessers get paid a lot of money to guess, and they don't have to be right because only God really knows what the weather is going to be. And we also looked at ice. This word for ice is only used in the book of Job. There is no other book that even mentions ice. Every specific type of weather that's mentioned in the book of Job leans into God's control. Even the whirlwind that knocked down the houses that Job's children were in was allowed by God. It was not something that Satan did without God's consent. Every mention of weather is God's control. And we see sometimes weather is a gift from God, sometimes it is judgment, and sometimes it's just weather. These are meant to reveal his power, and by revealing his power, show our reliance on God, whether or not we believe in him. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. It doesn't matter whether we believe in God, God still cares for us. Then we looked at the flood evidence. Job 22:15 through 16 says, "Will you keep the old way which wicked men have trod, who were cut down before their time, whose foundations were swept away by a flood?" And Job 9:5 through 8 and 12:14 through 15, it mentions God shaking the earth, moving mountains, and restraining the seas. Job 14:11 through 12 describes seas drying up and rivers vanishing, implying massive water displacement. And then the verse that I read first compares the wicked's fate to those who are swept away by a flood, and we see that as a reference to Noah's judgment. And what was interesting as I reread this, who were cut down before their time. Not only is that to mention that they all died before they naturally would, but look at the time span, look at their lifelines before the flood, living to be 900, 800, easily. 777 for Lamech, who died just before the flood. Methuselah, of course, 965, oldest recorded lifespan. All these men had great lifespans. And then Shem, who lives through the flood, 100 years before, 502 years after. Well, 500 years after. He lived to be only 602. He was missing 100, 200 years of his lifespan. And he saw his children live shorter and their children live shorter. And all these people started dying faster and faster. We see this extreme old age, a word only used in the book of Job, Yashish, for a very old man. And it's used 4 times. Because while Job was alive, and he was getting up there in age, he was at least 100, the people he was talking to were saying, there's gray-haired and aged among us, much older than your father. And I can't help but think, Job's father was still alive. Job's grandfather was still alive. His great-grandfather was still alive. And yet people were starting to die early. Like that dude was only 400 years old and he's dead already. From their point of view, listening to Shem talk about, yeah, before the flood, my great 7, 8 generations earlier passed away when I was about 100. Like, it's mind-boggling to Shem and to the people that came off the ark that the human lifespan was being shortened. Not only did man's wicked ways end in the flood, but God gave man less time to become wicked after the flood. Ancient people like Shem were still living during Job's lifetime. Imagine knowing that Shem was born before the flood. He's still alive a couple hundred years later, and yet your great-grandparents died having only lived 300 years. Then we looked at the Ice Age. And we looked at what evidence there was. Oh, do I have 2 slides in there? I do. Sorry, I got an extra slide in there. There we go. From whose womb comes the ice, and the frost of heaven, who gives it birth? The water is hardened like a stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen. The text of Job contains many hints that Job indeed lived during the Ice Age. The book of Job has more references to ice than any other book in the Bible, and of course is the only word for ice in the Bible. The book of Job has 5 references to snow. There's only one other book that has 5 references, and that's Psalms. It's a big book and has just as many references. This suggests Job was very familiar with the ice and snow. And we looked at the language in the book of Job, the words for ice, snow, frost, and hail, the timing of the Ice Age, that it was ongoing and it was diminishing. We looked at humans in the Ice Age. What were they doing? How were they surviving? We looked at the cave dwellers, and we looked at how many Ice Ages were there. Was there just one, or were there many? And from the evidence in the book of Job, we came to the conclusion that if you believe what the Bible says about the flood, then there's no reason to believe otherwise about the Ice Age. Even though the Ice Age is not particularly called out as such, there was no reason for the Bible to record the Ice Age because it wasn't a judgment on humanity. It was how God was getting people to actually spread across the whole earth. Because after the flood, they're all gathered on the plain of Shinar. They're all gathered together, and God had to split them by language at the Tower of Babel. And then he had to go, okay, now, seriously, the ends of the earth, ice bridge, land bridge, go. So while the Ice Age was a major event, it doesn't affect the judgment like the flood did. That was a judgment on humanity globally that eliminated, I won't give a percentage, all but 8 people on the planet were eliminated. The Ice Age didn't eliminate people wholesale. Sure, it made it tough for a lot of people, but it wasn't a judgment from God. So there's no reason to believe anything but the Ice Age was just the natural follow-up to the flood. Yeah.
Having just come back from Alaska, I tell you, it takes a lot of hardy people to live in cold weather. So I'm assuming that only the strongest and the best survive that Ice Age area because, the genetics would have had to be extra good to manage because I had nice warm heaters and it was freezing outside. I tried everything I could to not walk out the door,
Yeah, it takes them getting used to it. And it did force people to change where they lived. They had to move. Some of them went south. Some of them went east. Some of them went west. You weirdos went north. But we see that the Ice Age is revealed in the book of Job as an event that took place. And just like the Leviathan, the Behemoth, it's not just casually mentioned, but they don't make a big deal of it because this was not unusual. Because after the flood, the Ice Age was. They didn't know pre-Ice Age, except for the 8 that survived on the ark. They had no idea what the earth looked like beforehand. So why would they say, oh, it's so cold? Duh, it's been cold for the last 300 years. We're not going to make a special mention of this. So we see all these things in science, and the number one thing that comes back around is God's science is unchanged. If we can trust God with the science questions that we can observe and prove, we should trust him on theological questions that we cannot observe and prove. God's glory is promoted throughout the book of Job through his creation. He shows Job and Job's friends, hey, you have no way of competing with my majesty. God is supreme. His judgment is unassailable. But he also says, I don't need to judge somebody to do things for them or to them. Why was Job going through the torment? God never answered that question. Why did Job have to go through all the suffering? Was it pointless? Well, obviously not. We've got a record of it, so we can learn from it. But God didn't give Job an answer. God doesn't have to give us an answer for what we're going through in life. What he did give Job was assurance. Hey, I've got the clouds on a dial. I've got the waves restrained. I've got all these creatures that I coordinate. I've got you. Whether it's a good season or a bad season, I've got you. David Guzik says, it's interesting to consider that modern science has made amazing progress on answering some of the questions God set to Job. Modern science understands much more about the measurements of the earth. Modern science understands much more about the gravitational forces that keep the earth suspended. Modern science knows much more about the meteorological and hydrological systems of the earth. Modern science knows much more about the nature of light. God spent a lot of time asking Job questions to which he did not have the answers, some of which we still do not have answers for, but more understanding what God was talking about with Job. I want to assert with this series that God's understanding of nature and science is shown through his conversation with Job, that modern science backs up the truths pointed to in all of God's word. And I want to equip each of us to be clear how the Bible points to God as the author of science. Furthermore, if we trust God to know the science that we can test for, we should also trust God to know beyond what we can check on. Salvation, eternity, heaven, he built it. He knows it. My motivation through all these lessons has been to confirm our faith in God and to equip us to know the truth of the Bible is confirmed by science. And now I can say all of these lessons are going to be posted on YouTube. So if you missed one, you can go back and watch it again. All right. With that whirlwind, are there any questions? Yeah.
Do you recall, or does anyone recall, maybe a decade ago when the Chinese Communist Party was claiming they could make clouds and rain?
I do remember that.
Okay.
Yes.
Cloud seeding.
Yes. We have had many, many attempts at cloud seeding. The city of San Diego actually has a very fun, bad story.
During the like World's Fair, right?
Mhm. There was a man who was gifted at cloud seeding. He used silver nitrate. He'd shoot it in the cloud, and silver nitrate would cause the the water to condense, and it would rain.
Is this recently?
No,
No.
World's Fair,
Oh,
like
back
1900s.
Early 1900s, city of San Diego was going through a drought, so they hired this guy to come down and make rain. He was a professional rainmaker, and they paid him. And he shot off like 3 rockets in clouds and nothing came. And so he was like, okay, we'll try again. And the next day he got a rocket into this darker cloud. And not only did it rained and flooded the city of San Diego. City did not pay him. They sued him for damages. They're like, you want rain? But he couldn't control how much water was in the cloud. He couldn't control how much water came out of the cloud. And so he was messing with the natural cycle, and God was like, you want rain? I'll give you rain. And the city of San Diego suffered for it.
Well, he did the job though, yeah.
He did the job, he got run out of town. So yeah, modern science has come up with all sorts of radical ideas. Like, I think it was 10 years ago, someone suggested, because of the global climate change, if we suspended tiny mirrors in the atmosphere, it would cool the Earth. So they wanted to basically create an artificial aerosol, sort of like, you remember when Mount Pinatubo blew back in the early 90s over in the Philippines? The dust cloud was huge. And in San Diego, we got really red sunsets for a month. But it also globally changed the weather. Temperature averages dropped by 5 degrees around the world from one eruption of a volcano. Modern science has this idea of putting artificial stuff in the atmosphere to do something, and we can't compare to what God can do. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Comments? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.